So I'm going to try not to make this video too long because my son's labor and delivery was anything but ordinary. So I'm going to try to make it as quick as possible so I can explain everything to you guys. So with my son, I was around, I don't know, maybe 37 weeks, I would say, and I started getting the pups rash everywhere. I started getting like very tiny little stretch marks on my stomach, and the pups was inside of the stretch marks. It was all over my legs. It was covered from like top of my legs to the bottom. And I started getting it on my arms, and especially if I went outside, the more I went outside, the more the rash would get worse. It was really bad. So I went to the doctor about it the first time, and they were kind of unsure if it was pups or not. So they gave me, I believe it was Claritin. I don't know. It was something like that. But I just thought it was really lame for a rash. I know it's an antihistamine, but I don't know. I figured they were going to give me some kind of topical cream or something. But so they gave me that, sent me home, and it did not work. The rash just kept getting worse. So I tried cortisone cream, and I tried calamine lotion, and needless to say, it made the rash worse. It would cause it to spread. So it got really bad to the point I was super uncomfortable. As if, you know, being 37 weeks isn't really uncomfortable in the beginning. So yeah, so I tried everything. I couldn't sleep at night because I was itchy all over. I wanted to scratch everywhere. Warm water actually made it worse. I tried oatmeal baths. I did so much. So finally I just called the doctor in the middle of the night, and I was like, look, is there anything that you guys can do for me? And she was like, no, but I saw that you have a doctor's appointment in the morning, so just go in and, you know, usual. So I was like, fine, whatever. So I was kind of hoping by then they would induce me, because I know the only way to get rid of pups is to do induction. So yeah, so around maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke my husband up and I was like, I think I'm having contractions, because I'd had a couple of false alarms. Being a first-time mommy, you're kind of unsure, you know, of if it's real thing or not, whichever. But this time I knew for sure that it was the real thing. I was having intense contractions, and they were probably like 3 minutes apart, so we decided to go to the hospital. So we got there maybe around 3-ish, and they hooked me up to the contraction monitor, and of course I was having contractions every 45 seconds by that point. And they were not really bad, but they were starting to get more intense. The further along they went, the more intense they got. They checked me, and I was only probably like 1.5, 2 centimeters. So they were going to keep me there for a little bit to see if I started any progression to dilating. So they checked me again, maybe like in an hour and a half, and still made no progression. But my contractions were still steady and still progressing, and by that point they decided that they were just going to let me go home. That I was not in labor, but I was probably 150% sure that I was in labor, just from experiencing false alarms and stuff like that. I knew it was a real thing because the pain was just getting more and more intense, and it wasn't going away. So they sent me home. I had a doctor's appointment at 9 o'clock anyways in the morning, so it was around maybe 8 o'clock, and I went to the doctor's office, which is literally right across the street from the hospital where the OB is. And I went in there and I told them I needed to be seen right now, because I knew I was in labor, and the woman was like, okay, well, I see you have an appointment. And I wanted to see the doctor that was like a skin specialist there. So anyway, so needless to say, I went in there and she looked at my rash and she was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. You need to be induced so we can go ahead and start you on steroids to get rid of it. And I was like, thank you, Jesus. I was so excited. And then she checked me, because I told her, I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm in labor, but they sent me home from the hospital, and she checked me, and it already went to 3 centimeters. She was like, yeah, you need to go, and she was like, worst case scenario, I'll go ahead and start you on Pitocin to try to jump things along, because it doesn't seem like you're progressing any dilating. It seems like you're contracting, and you're just not dilating. So I got to the hospital, and I was like, I knew I was in labor, and the nurse was like, oh, I guess you were. So went ahead, checked in, got everything done, hooked me up to the contraction monitor, of course, and still having steadily contractions. And they checked me then, and I was like 3.5. By the time I'd gotten back to the hospital and gotten settled in and stuff. So, they tell me I can't eat anything, can only have ice, chips, popsicles, and that was it. and I was starving because I hadn't eaten anything all morning. It was horrible. So, you know, they checked me again maybe in a couple hours, and I still had made no progression. Around lunchtime, I would say like around 11:30, 12 that day, my water broke, and I was 550% sure that it was my water. Well, the nurse tried to tell me that, are you sure it was your water? I was like, I'm positive. So they did like a little swab culture they were going to send down to the lab to see if it was my water. And sure enough, once she pulled the swab culture out, more water came out. She's like, yeah, okay, it was your water. So, you know, she was like, things should really start getting going from here. Well, the doctor, you know, had ordered the Pitocin and stuff. And before I mention all that, let me just say that they were thinking about sending me home before my water even broke. They were like, yeah, the doctor doesn't really want to do Pitocin because they don't really like to do that unless you're 41, 42 weeks. And this other doctor was kind of contemplating whether sending me back home, and I did not want to go back home. I knew I was in labor. But thank goodness my water broke, and that's when they kept me. So they kept checking me, and I really wasn't making any progress. I got to maybe like 4.5, 5, and I really wasn't making any progress then. So then they started the Pitocin. And the doctor said that was supposed to be ordered right after my water broke, but of course the nurses didn't start it until like 5 or 6 that night. Maybe it might have been like 4, but it was somewhere in there. So they finally started the Pitocin. Well, that really jump-started things, and by then I really wanted my epidural. I couldn't take it anymore. The pain was just getting so bad and so intense, and that took forever to get my epidural. It took like an hour and a half for them to even come up to my room to get it. It was really bad. So I finally got the epidural, and my pain got way better, and finally I could get some rest because I hadn't had any sleep since like 2 that morning, and I knew that I was going to be pushing that night, so I knew I needed rest. So I rested for maybe about 2 hours, and then all of a sudden I started feeling pain again. And apparently it's from the pressure of the baby's head moving down into the birthing canal. It was really intense, and it just kept picking up and picking up with every contraction. It was really bad. And finally I got to the point where it was like, I need to push right now, and if I don't push, this baby's coming out. Well, the nurse comes in and says, well, the doctor's at home, so you're going to have to wait to push. And by that point, I was really irritated. She was like, the doctor should be here in like 10 minutes, and it should not be that long at all. And so I was like, okay, you know, I was trying to hold it in, and I was like, this isn't happening. And let's just say the doctor took an hour and a half to get there. Sorry, that was my dryer bell thing. Needless to say, the doctor took an hour and a half to get there. Thank God the baby didn't come out before then, but, you know, I just had that burning sensation to push. Needed to push. And then when the doctor got there, you know, I was pushing and pushing, and, you know, I was pushing with the nurse while she was there, but every time I would push, Kaden would go back in. So, like, they call it turtling, I believe is what the term for it is. So, come to find out, he was facing head up. So, that's when they got me, like, on my hands and knees. And the doctor was trying to get me on that. But it was really hard to do that because I had the epidural in. And, you know, if you've ever had an epidural, you can't feel anything. I mean, I literally could not feel my legs. They were just so heavy, they just collapsed, you know. It was like I was not in control of my body. So they had me doing that. And I was trying to stay up on my legs, but I couldn't. They would just collapse because they literally felt so heavy and dead, pretty much. And the doctor just got so pissed at me and finally said that I was the poorest excuse of somebody she had ever seen in labor. And I started crying. I was so upset, and my husband was in there with me, and he was really upset. And she left the room, and she told me that when I was ready to push and when I was ready to get this baby out, to let her know. Then she went out there, told my mom, got my mom all upset. My mom was crying and freaking out. She pretty much explained that if I didn't hurry up and get the baby out, that there was a risk to the baby and there was a risk to me and that we could die. I started to develop a fever too, not to mention. And this was, I don't know, I can't remember when I started pushing, but it was for like 3 or 4 hours I was pushing, I would say. So maybe around 1-ish, I would say, I started pushing. But anyway, so I started pushing and nothing was happening. The doctor was like, well, I'm going to cut your epidural off because you don't seem to know how to push. And, you know, I just couldn't feel anything. I thought I was pushing really well and I was doing everything I could. I was so exhausted and so tired that, you know, I was just getting weaker and weaker. I had a fever. So things just got really bad and really nasty. And finally she had to call a doctor, because this was a midwife. So she had to call a doctor and tell the doctor that, you know, I was a poor excuse of somebody in labor, and that she needed to come in and try to talk to me to get this baby out. Well, the doctor came in, extremely nice woman. And she was so patient and so kind with me, unlike this midwife who I cannot no longer stand. And was like, you know, I'll help you get this baby out. If we can use the vacuum, then if you're okay with that, then we can get this baby out. And I was like, sure, I don't care. Anything you need to do to get the baby out, I'm okay with it. So they used the vacuum, and I'm pushing. They're using the vacuum and still cannot get him out. He's pretty much stuck. And I think it's because of my pubic bone, and they just couldn't get him out from underneath there. He was just stuck pretty much. So the doctor, you know, said, well, we're just going to keep trying this for like maybe 20 more minutes, and if we can't get him out, then we'll go ahead and do a C-section. And by that point, I was just begging them to give me a C-section, because I was miserable and in pain too. It was just not working, and I knew that it wasn't going to happen. So it was really hard for me, you know, because I wanted the vaginal delivery. I wanted to be able to hold my son as soon as he came out, but that didn't work. So finally they decided, you know, okay, we're going to go ahead and do the C-section because this isn't working. And so they did the C-section, went in there. It took about an hour to prep for the C-section, and they went to go start cutting on me, and I was feeling it because my epidural had already worn off. Well, by then they had to knock me out. So they gave me some medicine to knock me out. I was completely passed out. So I had no idea when my son was born, which was really bad. Thank God my husband was there, you know. And pretty much from there, it gets really hard. And I really don't like talking about this because it makes me really upset to think about it. And I still get super emotional thinking about it. My son, when he was born, he had 2 air sacs in his lungs. And it came from being left in my stomach too long. He was in there way too long after my water broke. And it was causing me to get an infection. That's why I was getting a fever. So it affected him. After that, he was taken in intensive care, and where he stayed there for a week. We wasn't sure what was going to happen. You know, we really didn't know. And, you know, it's hard to sit there and watch your son just lay there, and you feel so helpless, and you feel like you want to do everything you can, but you can't. And so I wasn't even allowed to pick him up. You know, needless to say, after the C-section, I couldn't even see my son. Didn't even see my son for a day and a half after I had him. The only thing I could see was pictures. I couldn't even hold him. I couldn't look at him. Nothing. You know, it was really hard. And to this day, I don't want that with this birth. I don't want to have that same thing happen again. So I'm really nervous about it. You know, I still remember from this day on, the first day seeing my son and being able to go in there and just look at him and just touch him, but you can't hold him. You have no idea what it's like to just sit there and just have your son just look at you, and you can't even hold him, and you just want to hold him so bad. It was really hard. It was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Finally, after 3 days of being in there, I finally got to hold him, and by far it was the most amazing feeling ever, because I wanted to breastfeed him. And I did breastfeed him for a little bit. And it's just rewarding to be able to hold your son, and it's like that moment I felt like would never come. But they had to keep a monitor on the air sacs, and finally the air sacs started going away on their own. And I'm so thankful that they did, because that was by far the hardest thing, having to watch him. And then I had to leave the hospital and leave him there and, you know, go back and see him. It was hard, you know, and I don't wish that on anybody. So if anybody ever says anything to me like, you can do it, you have no idea what it's like to have to sit there and watch your son unless you've actually been through it. So, you know, I'm hoping that they'll let me have a VBAC, you know, and I'm hoping that the same thing doesn't happen. But I just want to have that moment where I can, like, pull my son out or, like, hold him and touch him for the first time, you know. That's what I want. So that's why I'm super strong about having a VBAC, but I know some hospitals are really strict about VBACs and their rules and stuff like that. So I'm really hoping that, you know, I can have a VBAC